Hello all and welcome to ERPfixers 2020 webcast series. I'm Jess Carson. I'm part of the ERPfixers team. Today we will be presenting Asset Accounting and S/4HANA with Oona Flanagan. Just as a disclosure in the beginning, this is a pre-recorded webcast. However, Oona is on the other line to answer all of your pending questions at the end of this presentation. So for those of you who are attending this presentation, please stick by till the end. Once we get to the end, we'll put Oona on and she'll go ahead and answer any of your questions. Additionally, if you please visit the bottom right hand of your screen, this is where you're going to find the Q&A box. This is where you can send us your questions and I'll shoot those over to Oona. Alrighty guys, before we get started, I want to go into a little bit about who we are as ERPfixers and Oona's background. So what is ERPfixers? We connect you with SAP experts to obtain quality immediate solutions for your SAP system. We consist of thousands of SAP freelancers globally in all SAP modules who are ready to help and assist with their knowledge in SAP. We offer online platform, SAP optimization assessment, material ledger, S/4HANA transitional roadmap, and cost transparency reports. If you would like more information, please go to www.erpfixers.com. So a little bit about Oona. Oona is a multilingual, fully qualified SAP and S/4HANA lead finance consultant. She's also a qualified accountant. She's worked with SAP and S/4HANA for more than 2 decades and mainly on global implementations. She's also worked on smaller projects in support training, but her biggest thing is globally. She has produced a number of online fixed asset and other training courses, several webinars, and is also a published author. Among others, Oona has written the following: Introduction to New Asset Accounting and S/4HANA, Delta from SAP ERP Financials to SAP S/4HANA Finance, and a practical guide to SAP S/4HANA Financial Accounting. If you want more information on Oona's books, please see our website. Once again, www.erpfixers.com. Okay, guys, I'm going to move into the presentation. Just as a reminder, if you are watching this live, please wait till the end of the presentation and refer to the Q&A box for all of your questions.
In today's webinar, I'll mainly refer to the on-premise version of S/4HANA, unless otherwise stated. Recently, I've heard the term any premise, which in my opinion is far more appropriate, but I'll stick with the term on-premise for this webinar, as most people are maybe more familiar with that. The releases are named after the year and month of release, so the latest on-premise release, 1909, was released in September 2019. The term any, or on-premise, indicates that you're in full control of how and where the S/4HANA system is hosted when you upgrade, how any extensibility is done, and how the users access the system. For example, using GUI transactions, the Fiori Launchpad, or both, given much of the configuration is still GUI-based. The main alternative is the subscription-based multi-tenant S/4HANA Cloud version, which I think may now be known as the Essentials Edition, where quarterly upgrades and Fiori are mandatory, but you are limited to what you can do in the system as it's shared with others. There is also the Central Finance option, with numerous SAP and non-SAP systems replicating postings into a Central Finance S/4HANA system. However, currently, you cannot replicate the full fixed asset processes into the Central Finance system, only the general ledger postings. Although I was not initially that impressed with the Fiori user experience, over time I found myself using Fiori apps increasingly, as I find more and more things that are easier in Fiori than the GUI, particularly for closing and reporting. So don't be surprised to see me using Fiori apps in a lot of examples. The screen shows the Fiori Launchpad. As you can see, instead of a complicated menu structure, you have simple tiles or apps for the transactions, which you can move around. Typically, each user would just see the files they use on their homepage, but I've set up different tabs for the different areas that I work with. Some transactions have been completely replaced or rewritten in Fiori, But the tiles on this page, for example, all link to the old GUI transactions. So if I open the Create Asset app, you'll see the AS01 screen from the GUI. You've probably heard that the architecture has changed in S/4HANA and that there are now far fewer tables to worry about. But what does it mean for asset accounting, and what is the Universal Journal? The Universal Journal is a financial document which contains fields from finance, controlling, account-based profitability analysis, asset accounting, material ledger, and so on. And all these fields are stored in the new finance table ACDOCA, shown in the slide, giving these areas a much tighter integration with finance and eliminating a lot of the old, now redundant tables. For the end user, it doesn't change too much. The Universal Journal is not a new document type as such, and it doesn't require new transactions. It just contains more data. As far as posting a financial journal goes, users still have pretty much the same mandatory fields that they needed to enter before, like dates, GL accounts, cost objects, amounts, and so on. But now, instead of storing them all in different tables in various modules, they're all posted at the same time and in one place, giving a single source of truth in finance. So reconciliations to check whether anything has only been posted in one place and not another are no longer necessary. In asset accounting, the document header fields, which used to be stored in ANEK, are now stored in both BKPF and ACDOCA. And the data that was in ANEP, ANEA, ANLP and ANLC is now stored in the ACDOCA table and the three tables below it in the diagram. However, if you already have custom programs reading from the old tables, these programs will be directed to something called a compatibility view with a similar name but preceded by FAAV. As the programs are only reading from a view, and the data is actually stored in ACDOCA and not in the old asset tables, you'll not be able to use programs that actually write to those tables, only ones that read from them. This transaction, which I pronounce as FAGLO3H, was available before S/4HANA, and I could of course have also used FAGLO3 or a Fiori app, but I find this transaction easier to illustrate how you can now run asset reports in the GL line items. And you can easily see all the fields available from ACDOCA. The main report is on the left, and all the ACDOCA fields are on the right. There are obviously new asset-specific reports, which I'll show you later on as well. As I mentioned earlier, S/4HANA has helped finance develop into one single source of truth, instead of a set of separate figures. Apart from the partial merge of finance with controlling, one of the areas where this is most pronounced is asset accounting. Before we look at the ways that asset accounting has improved in S/4HANA, I thought it would be useful to list some key areas that were not, let's say, brilliant before. Prior to S/4HANA, the main changes in asset accounting, such as parallel ledgers, were related to the new GL, and asset accounting wasn't the most efficient area of SAP. Asset accounting was not tightly integrated to the general ledger, and one of the most frustrating things was the number of tasks at the period end, including the periodic and batch postings, which couldn't be done until the end of the period, which was therefore the only time that you could get accurate reporting once everything was checked and reconciled. The whole period end took quite a long time, especially if you had a large number of assets. Running and checking the progress of the depreciation transaction was not the easiest thing to explain to a new user. And the reason choices were not clear. For example, when did you need to select the repeat and restart, or planned and unplanned buttons? Then you had a whole load of checks and reconciliations to make sure you hadn't missed anything. Now, whether you're posting a standard transaction or migrating from a legacy system, the leading ledger, any parallel ledgers, and the general ledger accounts are all updated at the same time as the fixed asset itself. The periodic posting transaction, ASKBN, no longer even exists, and you don't need delta depreciation areas. You can get real-time reporting throughout the month, the period end closes quicker, and the values in asset accounting and the general ledger are designed to be in sync with each other. So much so that when finance runs the carry forward for the general ledger, assets and accounts payable and receivable are all carried forward together, simply because everything is in the one ACDOCA table. You may, however, encounter issues if you try to reset any asset data because of this close integration between assets, finance and controlling. So I suggest you check out the SAP notes, for example SAP note 2419194 if you do need to do this. The apps to create and maintain individual assets have hardly changed, even in the current on-premise version, and the Asset Explorer still exists, although in Fury it's now called Asset Values on the Launchpad. The slide shows a new app called Display Asset Master Worklist. The top section contains the selection criteria and can be hidden by clicking on the Hide Filters button to give more space for the main table. The middle section of round button tabs allows you to toggle between the different groups of assets, for example to see just incomplete, in process, capitalised or retired, and you can add additional columns using the Settings button. The Settings button also allows you more options to sort and filter. The bottom section shows an overview. If you click on the arrow to the right of an asset in the on-premise 1909 versions, it currently still takes you to the Manage Fixed Assets app, which I'll show you shortly. From the 1911 S4HANA Cloud Edition, the two apps are merged into one and maintenance is more user-friendly. For example, you can copy and create from the overview part. I assume, or at least hope, that this new functionality will follow soon on-premise. In most Fury apps, you can click on the items in blue, for example here, the asset number, and you have a choice of additional apps to jump to in the first pop-up box. And depending what is authorised and configured in your system, you can click on more links to add additional fields to the first pop-up box. If I now go to the Manage Fixed Assets app, either by using the right arrow or the pop-up, I can see all the information about the asset values, as well as the master data in one place. There's an edit button, but on-premise that currently still takes me to the old GUI change transaction AS02. The first main tab is the Value tab. The first section shows depreciation information such as type of depreciation and useful life. I can toggle between different depreciation areas and scroll down and see the key figures for each, or I can go to Journal Entries on the Mini tab to see the documents by year and drill down to any documents posted to the asset. I can also select the Depreciation Mini tab to see the planned and posted depreciation, similar to the old Asset Explorer. Also shown on the slide is the net book value graph. The next main tab is the General tab, where most of the master data appears, including the descriptions, asset class, and serial numbers, as well as the cost assignments and so on, although not all fields are shown on the slide. On the Compare Values tab, there's a little filter button which allows me to select various years and depreciation areas to compare the different values as shown in the slide. The Origin tab shows similar supplier information to the standard Asset Master transaction, and you can also attach documents or notes in the other tabs. With S4HANA, you still have your country chart of depreciation containing depreciation areas to record different values for different accounting principles, tax or management reporting, as well as depreciation keys with the different depreciation rules. You also have asset classes to group assets for reporting. But in addition to the tighter integration with finance, there's also more flexibility. There is a new transaction, FINSC_ledger, to set up the currencies, ledgers and accounting principles. With S/4HANA, the new general ledger is mandatory, but you do not have to use all the functionality. For example, you could still use the accounts approach for parallel accounting. You have to specify in the settings that you are using the accounts approach, and you have to set up a dummy ledger group containing the leading ledger so that you can complete the mapping of the depreciation areas in asset accounting. When mapping the depreciation areas to the general ledger, you assign each depreciation area an accounting principle, and then assign the accounting principle to the ledger group. All the depreciation areas are equal, so depreciation area 1 could be mapped to a parallel ledger instead of the leading ledger. Currently, a separate area still needs to exist if you have additional local currencies, but you cannot yet use any of the newly freely defined currencies that are available in S/4HANA. Also, you cannot post to extension ledgers from asset accounting. Not everybody uses quantity update, but you can now choose which ledger has the quantity update. Historically, if you wanted to make a posting to one depreciation area and not another, you had to create separate transaction types. In S/4HANA, a new section has been added to many transactions that post a value adjustment, such as retirements, write-ups, post transfers, credit memos, manual, unplanned depreciation, post capitalisations, and so on. This is the area selection, where you can either choose one or more accounting principles or depreciation areas to post to, or leave blank to post to all. If you want to assign statistical cost objects to fixed asset reconciliation accounts, instead of using cost elements with category 90, you can now do so by selecting the Record Account Assignment box in the General Ledger Account Master Record Maintenance. In the slide, you can see how the GUI transaction has changed, but the field is of course in all the Fiori apps as well. In this section, we will see how the general ledger is updated with asset postings and what the depreciation looks like in S/4HANA, as well as how the Universal Journal fits in and what has changed at the year end. The finance document, or Universal Journal entry, contains information at asset level, even for depreciation. This means that instead of summarising the depreciation by cost object, there's now a separate line item for each asset. In the next slide, we'll see how an integrated posting works, and then we'll see a short demo. Integrated, in this case, means updating the asset on one side and the GRIR account, if the process includes a valuated goods receipt, on the other, or the asset on one side and the vendor and tax accounts on the other, if you're posting either a vendor invoice in a non-valuated goods receipt process or posting the invoice directly, i.e. without a purchase order. GRIR account being the control account where the goods receipts and invoice receipts are posted to. All postings are real-time. In other words, you don't need to run periodic posting at the month end to update other ledgers. To enable this all to happen in a single transaction, a new technical clearing account is used. An integrated posting consists of two parts. The first part is known as the operating part, as this is the initial posting updating the vendor or the GRIR account. Because certain accounts, such as the vendor, GRIR account, and tax accounts, cannot be updated in one ledger and not another, the operating document consists of a single document with a blank ledger group. In other words, one document updates all the ledgers in one go, in this case both the leading ledger 0L and the parallel ledger 2L. The offsetting account is a new technical clearing account. The second part is known as the evaluating part, and posts the value to the asset, but with a separate document for each ledger, again with the offset to the technical clearing account. We'll have a look at this in a second with a demo. As most of the Fury apps drill down into the GUI transaction to display acquisitions anyway, I'll show the next part on the GUI as it shows the functionality better. This slide shows the display transaction FB03 of a supplier invoice posted directly. So in the line items of the entry document, there's a credit to the supplier, a debit to the technical clearing account, and also a debit to tax. You'll notice a new button at the top of the screen called Asset Accounting. If I click on this, it takes us to the detailed postings. The first screen shows the local GAAP accounting principle in company code currency. You can see it consists of the entry document posted to a blank ledger group, i.e. all ledgers, and a second document posted only to the leading ledger, 0L. This debits the asset and credits the technical clearing account. If I go up to the button AP/currency, I can toggle between the different accounting principles and currencies. If I select IFRS, you see that the first document is the same number as before because it applies to all ledgers, and the second document on this page is the third document in the whole transaction and only refers to ledger 2L. In this case, the document currency is the same as the company code currency. But if I choose the group currency, you can see that that shows a different currency. Although the technical account includes the asset number in the description of the entry document, this is not the actual posting to the asset, and it's the second ledger-specific document number that appears, for example, in the Manage Fixed Assets app for the relevant depreciation area. If the asset is updated by settlement from an asset under construction, there's no need for an integrated posting, but you still can make separate postings with different rules for each ledger. The initial invoice is not an integrated posting. In this case, it was between the GRIR and an internal order, but the settlement to the AUC produced two documents, one for each ledger, which could then be settled independently to the asset. I'm going to demonstrate scheduling the depreciation run to show you how much easier it is in this Fury app called Schedule Asset Accounting Jobs, which opens on the overview screen that you see here. You can filter by creator and date to see recent tasks, or schedule a new task by clicking on the plus sign. The default here is the depreciation run, but you can also run recalculate depreciation and some other tasks depending on the release. Start immediately is already defaulted in, which saves a lot of time, but you can deselect this and enter a date and time if you prefer. You can select the company code and period as before, but just to compare with the old transaction, you now no longer have to enter the reason for the posting run as this is automatic. In addition, we now have the option to run the depreciation for just one accounting principle if we want to, or leave blank for all. I will select just the local GAAP, LG. I'm going to run in test mode, choose the detailed log, and then press schedule. You can see that the depreciation run is in process. And if I refresh by clicking Go, we can see that it's now finished. It's quick as it's just posting the planned depreciation and not recalculating it. If I click on the log, we can see that it was successful. I'll just click on an unsuccessful log to show you an example of that. I could also drill down on the results to go into the detailed depreciation by asset in the spool file, which is the same as before. Or I could click on the arrow on the right end of the line to check the settings. For example, to check if I ran it in test mode or which accounting principles are included. I'm going to show you a new transaction called Make Company Code Settings Asset Accounting Specific. It's transaction code FAA_CMP in the GUI. The Fury app of the same name is identical in look and functionality as it uses the GUI transaction, but I'll demo it in the GUI as it's easier to see with the stronger colours. Although it was released on premise 1709, initially it only contained the company code and migration settings, and from the 1909 release, the full closing transaction has been merged with the initial company code settings. It also contains some migration settings, which we'll see in a later section of this webinar. You use this transaction for the initial settings of which year is open and which is closed, and then going forward to close the next year in asset accounting. You can have a maximum of 2 years open at any one time. When you want to close the next year, this transaction now completely replaces the transaction AJAB, as well as OAAQ, which was used to undo the year-end close if necessary. The only proviso is that you keep no more than 2 years open at any one time. To close a year, you first select the company code and then the ledger that you want to close. In this example, the highest fiscal year open is 2020, and for the leading ledger, 2019 is already closed. But in the parallel ledger, 2L, only 2018 is closed. So we're going to close 2019 here as well. First we switch from display to change mode. Then we select the depreciation area we want to close. In this case there's only 32. And then we simply click on close. The pop-up confirms the closure of 2019 for ledger 2L. And you can see the closed fiscal year has changed to 2019 and the latest open fiscal year remains the same at 2020. Of course, if we make a mistake, we can easily reopen the year, obviously subject to the usual restrictions. While we're on the subject of the year end, assets are now carried forward in finance and not in asset accounting. AJRW is no longer there, and the Fury app for the carry forward is a lot more user friendly. Note that this carries forward the general ledger and elements of accounts payable and receivable as well as asset accounting. It's the equivalent of the FAG or GVTR, but has the advantage of giving an overview of exactly which company codes and ledgers have been carried forward, which have not, and which are in progress. Especially handy if you have a number of company codes and you can filter to see only the ones you want. There are 3 tabs: To Do, Preview and Done. On the first tab you select the companies and ledgers and click Carry Forward. Those companies are then moved to the second tab for you to check the results. If the results are OK, you can choose Run Changes to complete the carry forward, and the companies are moved to the third tab. At any time you can select a line to see the detailed balance sheet or profit and loss values. While most of the traditional asset balances, asset history and depreciation reports still exist in the GUI, there are some exciting reports in Fury that have a lot more flexibility and options. We've already seen the simplest form with the Display Asset Master Worklist. In this section we'll look at some of the embedded analytics and also the Asset Overview report. Because the asset detail is now in ACDOCA, we can also run a lot of financial reports at asset level as well. Here we see the Asset Overview page. This is a single app consisting of a number of cards which you can arrange how you please, or even hide if not required. They show certain KPIs on the face of the card, some of which you can either drill down further into or change what is displayed by selecting the drop-down. For example, the Asset Transactions card can be displayed by asset class, account determination, cost centre, profit centre, or segment. There's a filter bar available, although not shown in the slide, so you can choose currencies, companies, depreciation areas, ledgers, accounting principles, asset numbers, and so on. There are a number of multi-dimensional reports available, most of which behave in a similar way. Most of the selection criteria options are fairly self-explanatory, but there are a few points I'd like to mention. Items with a red star are mandatory, and you can use the Settings button to add additional fields for selection. Regarding the key figure group, as shown in the slide, there are various options you can select, and in the IMG, you can configure new groups if you require. Key figures are one of the things that you cannot change in the layout of the group. Two examples of asset-specific multi-dimensional reports are the Asset History and Asset Balances reports. There's usually a default layout with asset classes in the rows and the opening balance, additions, disposals, depreciation, etc. in the columns, but it's almost impossible to see the descriptions properly. So I swapped the axes so that the key figure or KF codes appear in the wider rows. Just to explain a few things about the layout, you can drag and drop dimensions to and from the rows and columns. If you right-click on an item in the columns, you can change how it's displayed by code or description or both. You can change how zero items and totals are displayed, and even bring in attributes from certain types of dimension. You can filter with different criteria, for example top 10, or items greater than or equal to. And you can jump to other apps, show the report in chart or table format, or both. You can export to Excel or expand the report to full screen. This slide shows some examples of charts. Although they probably make more sense with cost reports, it's worth knowing what's available. Depreciation lists show total depreciation posted to an asset. And you have quite a flexible asset transactions report too. However, with the asset detail in ACDOCA, you can now use the GL line item display report, choosing the relevant GL accounts and adding in the asset data to see detailed postings by asset and GL accounts. You can also, for example, run the trial balance just for the asset GL accounts and drag the asset number into the dimensions. The evaluation groups used to set up your own codes in previous versions of SAP still exist for the moment, but there is a new Fury app called Custom Fields and Logic, which is available in S/4HANA, which I'll run through quickly in this section. The first step is to click on the plus sign and complete the pop-up box. The Custom Fields and Logic app allows you to create custom fields in various areas, including the asset master data. With the evaluation groups, you were restricted to either 4 or 8 alphanumeric characters, whereas with the custom field, you can have a checkbox, date, phone number, time, email, web address, and so on, as well as using custom logic. In our case, we'll use a date. It's a very quick process to set up, although as you're adding fields to tables, you should be careful of others working in the system. I can then go to the UIs and Reports tab and choose where to enable the field. In this case, I'm enabling it everywhere, Master Data, Reports, and in the GUI Master Data. After saving, in order to see it, I have to publish it. This may take some time while the field is added to the various different places and tables, and some of the programs may recompile when you first go into them afterwards. I'll just show you quickly the field in the Asset Master app, which uses the GUI transaction AS01. Although there are a number of different ways of migrating data, in this next section I'll talk mainly about the different options for a greenfield migration to an on-premise system. The first step is to ensure that you have the relevant settings in the transaction FAA_CMP, which we've already seen when we talked about closing and reopening the fiscal years. This time I'm showing the Fury app, which is actually calling the GUI transaction. Previously, we looked at the General Settings tab, but this time we'll look at the Legacy Data Transfer tab. You can upload opening balances at a year end as well as transactions and posted transactions for mid-year transfers. You can create a number of separate transfers on different dates. The only proviso is that you must fully complete and close one before you can create another. In this transaction, you can choose the transfer date, status, and document type. You can do the transfer with either of the two ongoing statuses, but with the first, other postings such as normal acquisitions and retirements are not permitted. Normally during the migration, the system calculates the planned depreciation for the assets. However, if you have a lot of assets, you can switch this off and run the recalculate depreciation transaction, or app, afterwards. The other setting you will need to check is the offsetting account for the legacy data transfer, which can be found in the IMG. This setting can only be made at chart of account level and not at company code level. Historically, when you uploaded the opening balances to assets, you had to update the asset values and the general ledger in two separate steps. Because the accounts are reconciliation accounts, it also involved either switching the reconciliation accounts back to normal accounts for the opening balance journal, or using special transactions to bypass the reconciliation part. Often the journal totals didn't match the asset totals, or the split was different, or at the very least there were rounding differences. Now, because the asset data is part of the ACDOCA table, both are updated simultaneously for all ledgers and depreciation areas, so you no longer need the separate journal. This is regardless of whether you're uploading individual balances, for example in a test system, or using another tool to upload a number of assets in one go. The old LS&W still exists, but the options batch input and direct input are no longer available, and it's not supported with the new posting logic structures and Fiori apps. Instead, SAP recommends a new migration cockpit, launched by transaction LTMC, or URL. You can still use the old transaction AS100, which has been adapted to the new posting logic. I'm going to start by showing you the transactions to upload individual assets, which might be used to create some test assets prior to using the cockpit, or if you only have a few assets anyway. Historically, AS91 could be used for creating the asset master and entering the asset values, and then you'd post a journal to the general ledger. In S4HANA, AS91 can be used to create the master data, but the button to enter the asset values is no longer valid, and you now have to go to a separate transaction, ABLDT, to enter the values. When you save the values in ABLDT, a posting is automatically made to the general ledger. Note that if you make a mistake, you have to reverse the journal before you can enter new values. You can't just overwrite them. In addition, transaction ABLDT_OI exists to post the open items for an asset under construction with line item processing and down payments. However, I would check SAP notes, so there are some restrictions on the dates that you can use. With the migration cockpit, you can either download and fill in one of the 100 or so ready-to-use templates, or you can use staging tables. If you're using the templates, the file limit was about 100 megabytes, although you can increase that by using zip files, and you can also upload and track multiple files. Templates are easy to use. The initial worksheet contains instructions, the second worksheet contains the field list, and the other sheets equate to approximately the values in different tabs or sections in the master data and values. For example, one sheet is for time-dependent items. There are separate tabs for cumulative values at the year end, as well as for the transactions during the year for a mid-year transfer. If the templates are not sufficient, you can use the transaction LTMOM, which is a migration object modeler, to adapt them. During the migration, there's a bar at the top showing progress through the different steps, and validation messages are given at the relevant steps. Messages can be information, warning, or blocking, and you can download them to a spreadsheet. You can also simulate the import to see what the results would be before the final upload. Generally, I believe there have been a number of useful improvements in asset accounting in S/4HANA, as well as some useful new Fiori apps. This section summarises what we covered in the webinar, and there's also a table of the main changes to transaction codes. In my first webinar, I tried to track the transaction codes, which subtly changed by adding one letter at the end. However, all forms of the transactions seem to point to the same new S/4HANA program anyway. Some transactions now have the choice of accounting principle or depreciation area. Others, like the depreciation run and the legacy data codes such as AS91, have changed in different ways, but again kept the same or similar codes. So in this table, I've just put the key transactions that are either completely new, obsolete, or have been completely replaced. I explained a little about how the underlying tables have changed in S/4HANA and how everything is now stored in the new ACDOCA table. This allows the asset and the general ledger to be updated at the same time, and you can now add asset fields to many reports in the general ledger. There are less tasks to do at the period end, and you don't have to wait until the end of the period to see reports. There's more flexibility setting up the depreciation areas, and instead of using transaction types to post to one area and not another, the accounting principle and depreciation fields are now available in many transactions. There's improved reporting, in particular the asset history, and asset balances are available as multi-dimensional reports that you can tailor exactly how you want, and you can add new fields with the custom fields and logic app. Finally, the new migration cockpit and templates makes migration much easier than in the past. I haven't, of course, covered everything, just enough to give you an idea of what's available. Although on premise, a lot of Fiori apps still call the old GUI transaction. I hope that will change soon, given the changes that have already occurred in S/4HANA Cloud. If you do find some of the apps that I've covered appear a bit different in your system, you can check the details on the Fiori library site, link on the screen. If you go to the Implementation Information tab first and choose the release, then you can see information related to that release on the Product Features tab, and sometimes a link to further documentation. The Implementation tab also contains information about configuring the app and the relevant roles and catalogues, etc. So thank you all for attending the webinar, and I hope the session has been useful for you.
Okay, guys, so now we're going to get into the live Q&A. I'm going over to the chat box now to see what you guys have for me. We ended up running out of time. Just as a reminder, we will be posting this on our website, www.erpfixers.com, as well as on YouTube with answers to those questions. So I will be taking down the questions as they're coming into the chat box, and then we'll provide them again for you if we do not have enough time to get to all of them today. Okay, so it looks like I don't have any questions yet. Come on, guys, if you've got some questions, please send them over. And we do have Oona on the other line waiting to give you answers. I do see Gregory. Thank you so much. Very informative. Thank you, Gregory, for that awesome comment. If anybody else wants to post in the chat, please do so now. Okay, so it looks like we don't have any questions for you today, Oona. Is there anything that you would like to close with this presentation? Anything that you would like to leave our audience with today?
No, just thank you very much for listening, really.
Okay, guys.
But, you know, if you have any questions, do let me know.
So it looks like we did have a question come up. This is from Gregory. He says, what about multiple fiscal calendars?
Do you mean different calendars for different ledgers? If that's what you mean, I think we...
He said yes.
I think there's a way of doing it using the representative ledgers. Just trying to think how to do it. You have to create a kind of dummy ledger to use the different year ends. Does that answer it?
He hasn't. He said yes, that answers it. Okay, guys. So we're going to wrap this up since it doesn't look like we have a ton of questions coming in. If you guys have any more questions, please send it in the chat. That way I can get them written down and have them posted along with the presentation next week. So I'm going to say going once, going twice. Okay, if we don't have any takers, I'm going to go ahead and end this presentation. Oona, thank you so very much. We had a great turnout today. Your presentation was very informative. We've got a lot of great feedback. As always, we appreciate your time and thank you for taking time out of your day today to participate with our webcast series.
Thank you.